Welcome back to another episode of Why Do I Do That? Today's episode question is, why do I blame myself for everything? And again, I feel like all of these questions lately have just been like can relate, hard relate. And I have got so many clients that come to mind, recent clients, past clients that are in this pattern where they blame themselves for everything. And it's such a hard habit to break. So let's break down why. Why do I blame myself for everything? The first thing that comes to mind is it's called self-gaslighting. And it's when someone said it to me a few years ago, and she said to me, you see things and you say them. And again, so common, all of my clients, you see things, you say them, and you be like, oh, my partner said this, or they did X, Y, Z. You see something, you see it's wrong. And then within minutes, you flip it and you're like, oh, but he does this and he does that. And well, I do this and I did that. And maybe I did something to make him angry, or maybe I did something to whatever it is. This is called self-gaslighting. And it goes hand in hand with this like unsee response. So you see something, it feels wrong, something feels off, and then you unsee it. So why would we self-gaslight, or why would we get into this pattern where we unsee things? And the most obvious answer to me is that we unsee things because we can't deal with the consequences of what it would mean if we had to see it, if we had to actually accept that that thing is happening. And most of the time, this comes back to like we want to stay in what's familiar, in what we know. And if it's familiar, it feels safe, even if it feels unsafe. I talk about this in a lot of episodes, and our brain is always going to stay with what it knows, even if that feels awful, because what's familiar is what is safe. It's in our control. Taking a risk and saying, well, no, you're to blame, and to actually leave that person feels impossible for some women, especially women who have been caught in this self-gaslighting and self-blame cycle for a really long time. So our brain unsees the information to keep us in what we know, to keep us in what's familiar, and also to keep us safe. So this unseeing response is probably one of the most difficult things to heal and to work with, because women don't necessarily know that they're doing it until you point it out to them. And I have had so many clients who I've pointed out to them, I'm like, do you see what you're doing here? You've constantly are saying this thing happened and then you're forgetting about it, or this thing happened and you're making excuses for it and diffusing it and moving it out of the way. And you're going into this pattern where you're saying something's wrong and then you're turning it around onto yourself constantly. And for some women, they can do it. Like I had a client the other day, within like a sort of 5-minute conversation, she did it 6 times. She said something and then she retracted. She said something, she retracted. And I can find this and pick up on this so well in women because I did it so badly and for so long. And I had someone point it out to me and was like, oh, gobsmacked, can't believe that's what I've been doing, until she pointed it out. And then I noticed how often I did it. And so self-gaslighting, where does it come from? It comes from, most of the time, being gaslit. So if you have grown up in a childhood where you were told that that's not what happened and you're crazy, or you know that what you're feeling isn't true or valid, or you have parents who get angry at you and then tell you that it's your fault, or they erupt and then they say, well, it's because you did this and you did that, and you're constantly used to taking the blame, you will grow up to do this to yourself. This just becomes a pattern. It's the same in relationships, especially those relationships in teenage years and those earlier on relationships, or women that are in long-term relationships. If a woman has been in a long-term relationship for like 10 plus years, and every single time she feels like there's something that she wants to discuss with her partner and her partner turns it back onto her, and she accepts it, potentially because she has low self-worth, and she accepts it and she puts it back onto herself. By like 5 years in, her partner does not even have to do this. She will literally think of something that is upsetting her, and she will already go through what his response would be in her own mind, and she will go, it's probably me. It's probably because I did this. I'm probably just being crazy. I'm not going to say anything. It's like a self-preservation thing, because you know that when you go to that person, their reaction is not going to be good. They're going to turn it onto you anyway. You just learn over time to self-gaslight and to internalize that problem and to blame yourself. And women are so unaware of the fact that they're doing this until someone points it out. And so I'm hoping that some of you right now will be having these moments where you're like, oh, I think I do that. Because once you're awake to it and aware of it, that self-awareness, you start to notice how chronically you do it with everything. It's not just relationships with a romantic partner. It can also be with friendships, family, all sorts of dynamics. So what it is it's self-gaslighting. That's why you blame yourself for everything. Why do we do it? Another part is because it not just keeps us in that familiar situation and allows us to keep a relationship with somebody, it makes us feel like we're in control in a really fucking backwards way. Because if you take on the blame, and I did this for a good decade, if you take the blame and every time you're triggered or every time something upsets you, if you've been doing the work and you're used to like digging into beliefs and traumas and where things come from and this like self-reflection, the woman who self-blames and who self-gaslights is often so drawn to self-help work. One, because she's struggling, she's got low self-worth, she's looking for something to fix herself, but also because it so perfectly slots in with this behavior of self-gaslighting and self-blame. Because if you're constantly going, oh, like, why did that trigger me? Where did that come from? What part do I need to work with? What shadow is that? And you're putting all of it back onto yourself, you get to stay where you are because you're blaming yourself. You don't have to leave that relationship and do the hard thing. You just continue to work on yourself and blame yourself. But it also feels like you're in control, because if you can change it, then you're in control of it. If it's somebody else, you can't change it. Therefore, it's out of your control. And if we think about the woman that does this, she normally does this for protection because she feels unsafe. And if she feels unsafe, she needs to be in control to feel safe. So it's just this huge big loop where you feel unsafe, you get triggered. Instead of projecting it because you're always met with this sort of fight reaction, you internalize it, feeling like you're taking back control of yourself because you can work on that. But what happens is my favorite plot twist, my favorite thing that happens with clients is that eventually they internalize it so much that they get to this point where they meet someone like me or a coach that says to them, do you know that you've actually done a lot of work on yourself and it's actually not you anymore? You're actually in a toxic relationship. Like, the things that you're being triggered by are actually like fucked up things that shouldn't be happening. It's actually not a you issue. It's actually a you issue that you're still staying. It's actually a power issue right now. So yes, you're in control of your healing, and yes, you're in control of how you respond. But eventually you get to the point where you're like, I just actually don't want to be with this person anymore because I don't deserve this. And again, I am the perfect example of this because I was in a relationship where I was triggered all the time and I was forced to reflect, oh, why is that triggering me? Where does that come from? And I did a decade of work to get to the point where I was like, don't fucking speak to me like that. And I was able to just stand up for myself and say, actually, that's like, you know, basic needs. You should be able to, that's basic needs. That's human needs. And I had this like confidence and power and strength in myself to go, oh, okay, to know when I'm really triggered and when something's a past wound, and to know when someone's just being an asshole and you don't need that sort of person in your life, and to notice that pattern of, oh, I've attracted this person into my life. I was attracted to this person and to this behavior because I was playing out a pattern. am I actually that person anymore? Do I want to keep playing that pattern? No, I don't. And then you're able to go, actually, hold on a minute, and you're able to clearly communicate. This is how you know you're not triggered, because you're calm, you're able to communicate. Actually, no, that's not acceptable behavior. That's actually disrespectful. And you can actually call things out for what they are and put it back onto that person. And 9 times out of 10, what happens with this plot twist is that they start putting it back onto that person, and that person hates it because they've been living a certain way where they're like, whoa. You normally just blame yourself and feel guilty and then come crawling back to me, and then we do this pattern where you just blame yourself and I never have to take accountability for my actions. And all of a sudden you're like calmly like holding this mirror up for them, and they don't like that. And if they're not willing to do the work, if they're not, into this sort of thing, if they're not able to self-inquire, they're not willing to do that work, it will just end up to the point where the woman leaves. Most of my female clients that get to this point where they stop self-blaming and they start going, hold on a minute, I'm just going to hold the mirror up for you for a little bit and put your behaviors back onto you, they end up leaving the relationship because they very quickly realize that that person isn't going to change. So we do this in the beginning because of, as I mentioned, low self-worth, past toxic relationships that get us caught in this pattern, and potentially a childhood pattern that's playing out that allows us to self-blame. The way that we break out of it and how we stop it is we start noticing the difference between when we're triggered and when something is just poor behavior. And it can be a really tricky thing to determine. This is why a lot of people seek outside help, like counseling, therapy, working with myself, because they don't actually know. If you've been in it for a really long time, you don't actually know what's normal and what's toxic because you're so used to it. And this is where I am that sounding board with my clients, where sometimes I will say to them, that's definitely a you thing. That's an overreaction. That's a trigger. That's a past wound coming up. And sometimes I'll say to them, that's just poor. That's not right. That's not right. And what I'll often find with women is when I point out that a behavior is not okay and it's toxic, and that what this person is doing isn't healthy, they'll go back into this self-blame cycle. Oh yeah, but he only said that because I did this and I'm not perfect and sometimes I do this, and they'll go back into that self-blame spiral. And then I point it out to them. Oh, okay. So do you notice how when you told me this really fucked up thing that this person did, you just went straight into self-blame? And they'll go, oh, I did it again. And it's just this process of them becoming aware of that's actually a normal reaction, and, starting to accept that you're human and that some things are just normal reactions. And this can be really difficult when nothing goes outside of the relationship. And if you think about like a narcissistic relationship, which a lot of these are, where the person is constantly pushing the blame back onto the other person and gaslighting them, if you think about that sort of relationship, those people are often quite removed from friendship circles and things like that. They're isolated, which is part of the pattern, and they don't actually have a sounding board, or they feel unsafe to speak about what's happening in the relationship because they know that their partner would be so upset if they were to speak about what this person was doing. And to that, I say to my clients, if your partner is ashamed of their behaviors, of what's happening behind closed doors, and is telling you that you cannot speak to somebody about it, they know it's a wrong behavior. They 100% know that that is a wrong behavior. I was doing a workshop the other day, and the woman was talking about integrity, and she was talking about how Big Brother scenario, like if someone was following you around with a camera all the time in your life and it was being broadcast to the world, would you be proud of how you were showing up? Would you be, are you the same out in the world as you are behind closed doors? And no one is, to a degree, but would you still be proud of the way that you show up? Would you be proud of who you are, who you present as behind closed doors? And that's that thing of like, if you have nothing to hide, and if your partner has nothing to hide in their behaviors, there's no issue in you speaking about it with friends. So if they're saying things to you that feel toxic and you're getting in these arguments and they're saying awful things and you're not able to speak to friends and things about that because they've said to you, don't talk to anyone about this. They know that what they're doing is wrong, and therefore that's an indication to you that you should be able to reflect that back to them and say, well, if it's not wrong, why can't I speak to people about it? Or if someone else saw this the way that you just spoke to me, would you be embarrassed if someone was watching, if someone saw a recording of this? Like, would you be embarrassed by that behavior? And if to be honest, if you're talking to a narcissist, they're just going to deflect and not even answer your question. But it's just those sorts of questions that can help you to start to go, hold on a minute. Do you think this behavior is acceptable? Do you think it's okay to speak to me like that? Do you think that it's okay for you to deflect? Do you think that, and putting those questions back onto them, even if they don't receive it, even if they deflect, continuing to stick to that point and putting the questions back onto them so that they can become accountable for their actions, not for them, but for you. Because if your pattern is to self-blame and to bring it all back onto you and to internalize it and to feel guilty and to beat yourself up, the most healing thing that you can do and practice is just slowing down and starting to reflect the person's words and behaviors back to them and just asking them those simple questions. So again, super hard to do if you have low self-worth, if you're not used to speaking up and standing up for yourself, but this is the work. It's difficult, it's hard, it's a pattern that you need to break. It's so much easier to break it if you have done the subconscious work, if you've done the work and gone through those layers of, well, I've worked on all my triggers, I've worked on my past relationships and past traumas, and I've removed these subconscious limiting beliefs, and I know that I'm showing up with an integrity in this relationship. I know that I'm coming in with love. I know that I'm doing everything I can because I've done that work. There's only one option left, and it's this person. And I've attracted this person, or I've been attracted to this person because an old version of me who had low self-worth, who couldn't stand up for herself, who thought she was powerless, who was taught to be a certain way, was playing out a pattern with this person. Do I want to continue that pattern? If I'm highlighting it to them and they can't hold it, they can't accept it, they're not willing to grow, am I willing to continue this pattern for the rest of my life? And for me, in a past relationship, it was like, there is no way that I can feel powerful, because I was talking on social media about taking back my power from my father and taking back my power in my life and speaking up and standing up. And I was doing it in so many areas except for in this relationship. And it was like, how can I be in a relationship where someone's trying to constantly bring me down and make me feel powerless and say to the world that I'm working on stepping up and being powerful? It's like, over here I felt powerful and here I felt powerless, and there was no way for me to stay in this relationship and feel powerful. I did everything you could imagine. Like, I was like, well, what about if I just live kind of a separate life? And what about if I work on this? And what about if I just start standing up for myself? Or what about if I express my needs? And I tried everything to be sort of in my power and to feel this like feminine power, but within the relationship. And everything was a dead end. Everything got shut down, turned back onto me. And so I eventually was like, there is no way that I can be the powerful woman that I want to be and stay in this relationship. I can't create the life that I want and stay in this relationship. And it got to that point where it was like, okay, am I who I say I am? And I bit the bullet and left that relationship and felt that power come back to me and took that into a new relationship. All of those learnings about the things that I had been practicing, about standing up for myself, speaking up and putting the responsibility back onto that person and things like that. All of those skills and knowledge I've taken into other areas of life, and then gone into a healthy relationship where I don't even have to do that, because if I say that something's happened, he's like, when did that happen? And how do you feel? And what can I do? And how can I love you better? And you just don't even have to worry about those sorts of things. And that's when you know that you're in a healthy relationship. So if you feel like you blame yourself for everything and you're like at the start where you're just like, I can't even stand up for myself, I'm so deeply in this pattern, then I can absolutely help you with this. This is where you need to start doing that work of reprogramming your subconscious. This is where you need to do that work of processing those past traumas and limiting beliefs and what's holding you there, and all of that work until you can get to the point where you have enough power to then speak up and put it back onto them to see how they respond. I'm not saying you have to leave. I'm saying you need to get yourself strong and powerful and regulated enough to the point where you can hold a conversation where you can actually start to put some responsibility back onto that person to see how they respond, to see if they'll up level, to see if they want to heal and grow the relationship with you, or whether they're just straight into protection and it's you and it's your fault and shut down. So if you know someone who's doing this, who's blaming themselves for everything, who's stuck in a toxic relationship, who is self-gaslighting, self-blaming, tell them to book a session, listen to this podcast, send them this episode, and thank you again for listening.